The lights died at 23:47. 3 seconds of absolute darkness, then emergency red lighting flooded the control room. Dr. Viktor Sokolov looked at the monitors and felt his blood freeze. Standing in the resonance chamber, where nothing should exist except vacuum and a suspended beryllium cylinder, was a figure in a torn radiation suit. The faceplate was cracked. Through it, he glimpsed a face that was human-shaped but fundamentally wrong, stretched leather over shifting bones. Empty eye sockets that somehow stared directly at him through the camera. 15 minutes earlier, everything had been perfect. The final countdown had begun for a test 8 months in the preparation. 400 meters beneath Chernobyl's Reactor 4, in a facility called Object 47B that officially didn't exist, Viktor's life work was about to prove that parallel dimensions were real, or destroy everyone trying. He had designed this experiment after 2 men in dark suits offered him unlimited funding to pursue theories the academic world called fantasy. 3 years of secret work, 63 personnel who knew the truth, all building toward this moment. Behind him, Major Dmitry Petrov stood with crossed arms, the KGB officer assigned to ensure security and secrecy. At the main console, Dr. Elena Morozova initiated the final sequence with trembling hands. 32, brilliant, initially skeptical, until the preliminary data convinced her. Her calculation suggested that maintaining resonance for more than 10 seconds would cause something unprecedented. The equations broke down past that threshold. At 0, the resonance chamber simply ceased to exist. 7 endless seconds of impossible darkness on the monitors. Then shapes emerged like objects through deep water. Another control room materialized, mirror image of their own. Same equipment, same gray walls, but scattered with mummified bodies in identical lab coats, security badges faded with age. Messages covered the walls in dried blood. Elena read them aloud, voice breaking. Warning, resonance achieved, contamination from other side. They came through. They are us, but not us. Containment failed. The final message, written in letters half a meter tall. Close the door, close the door, close the door. At the bottom, a date, October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. In their world, peace had prevailed. But in this parallel reality, the missiles had flown. Nuclear war had consumed that Earth 23 years ago. These other scientists had opened a similar door. Something came through, and everyone died. Petrov ordered immediate lockdown. No communications to Moscow until they understood this. His hand moved to his sidearm as Viktor stared at the screens, processing that they had just discovered a dimension that had destroyed itself with atomic fire. The chamber remained displaced for 3 minutes before automatic shutdown. As electromagnetic fields collapsed, reality reasserted with a thunderclap that shook the facility. Alarms screamed. Viktor thought they had triggered meltdown in the reactor above. But readings stabilized. The chamber phased back intact. Technical success. Potential doom. A technician's frightened voice cut through relief. External radiation monitor showing contamination. Wasn't there before. Viktor checked the readout. Barely above background, but present and rising. Something radioactive had crossed over. If radiation could cross, what else had? Elena analyzed the isotopes, hands shaking. Cobalt-60 signatures from salted bombs. Doomsday weapons designed to poison entire regions for generations. This radiation came from a world burned to ash, and they had opened a door to it. Petrov moved toward communications. 3 steps before the lights died. 3 seconds of darkness. In that darkness, Viktor heard impossible sounds from the sealed chamber. Footsteps, metal dragging, movement. Emergency lighting returned. The monitors showed the chamber interior. The figure in the radiation suit stood where the cylinder had been moments before. Elena screamed. Petrov shouted into his radio for armed security, blast door seals, his voice drowned out by deep rumbling from below, from the facility's deepest level. Something responding to the visitor, something that had been waiting. Viktor watched the figure glide across the chamber floor, physics-defying motion approaching the sealed door. Through the cracked faceplate, that wrong face turned toward the camera, hollow sockets fixing on him with impossible awareness. Realization hit like physical impact. The preliminary tests over 8 months, those microsecond anomalies, had been opening smaller doors. Brief windows that something noticed and learned to exploit. Contamination hadn't just come through tonight. It had been seeping through for months. Something had been preparing, studying them, waiting for a door large enough to cross completely. The thing in the chamber wasn't the first visitor, just the first visible one. Viktor's eyes swept the control room. How many of the 47 preliminary tests had allowed microscopic intrusions? How long to change someone? Could something cross over and replace them? Elena stared at her hands. Her eyes were different. Not the color, nothing physical Viktor could identify, but something in how she looked at things. She had insisted on attending every preliminary test. When had she changed? Petrov shouted orders, but nobody moved. Security teams weren't responding. The communication system crackled with static and voices speaking Russian with wrong inflections that made Viktor's skin crawl. How deep did contamination go? How many of 63 personnel were still human? The figure placed one hand on the sealed door. Metal frosted where it touched. Ice crystals spreading in geometric patterns that hurt to look at. 10 centimeters of reinforced steel began cracking like glass. Viktor stumbled backward. Through the monitor, he watched the impossible figure pull the door open as if it weighed nothing, metal shrieking. Beyond it, other figures approached in radiation suits, more things wearing human appearance. They had been in the facility all along, waiting. Elena turned to him, face calm and pitying. "You don't understand yet," she said, voice carrying wrong inflections. "We're not invading, we're escaping. Our world died 23 years ago. We survived in the spaces between, in cracks you opened. We just want to live again." Petrov's gun pointed at Elena, then monitors, then back, hand shaking. "How many?" Elena's sad smile. "Enough. We've been careful. In our world, we opened the door too quickly. Contamination spread before we could adapt. But here, we had 8 months to study you, learn to be you, prepare." She looked at Viktor. "You asked whether parallel dimensions could intersect. The answer is yes. You asked what would happen. Now you know." Rumbling from below grew louder. Not machinery, but something organic moving through lower levels. Deep storage where they kept failed experiments, contaminated equipment, things locked away and forgotten. What if those things had been growing, changing, waiting? Alarms screamed throughout Object 47B, cascading system failures. Monitors showed other facility areas, corridors filling with radiation-suited figures moving with inhuman grace. Human personnel running for exits, but blast doors sealing according to lockdown, trapping them inside. Viktor recognized a figure on screen. Dr. Yuri Kozlov, dead 6 weeks in a laboratory accident. Viktor had attended the funeral, but there was Yuri walking corridors with jerky movements, head tilted at a neck-breaking angle. Dead ones are harder to control, Elena said. Fresh conversions work better, but we needed numbers over perfection. When your world's missiles fly, and they will, we'll survive the fire like before. When radiation fades, we inherit what's left. Petrov fired. Perfect heart shot. Elena looked at the wound, touched blood too dark and viscous. That won't work. We're not alive like you understand. We're echoes of life, memories of what we were before fire. You can't kill what's already dead. But she bled. The blood pooled, shapes moving in it, trying to form. Contamination wasn't just in people, but everything, spreading through the facility like living infection, rewriting reality molecularly. The air felt thick. Viktor's hands were impossibly cold. The chamber figure emerged into corridor. Monitors showed dozens behind it, filling hallways like slow-motion flood. Radiation suits, lab coats, security uniforms, all moving with wrong grace, all with hollow eyes. Viktor lunged for the console, shoving past Elena, ignoring Petrov's shout. His fingers found emergency shutdown, the master override to flood the chamber with boron and seal it permanently. Elena's hand closed around his wrist with inhuman strength, burning cold grip. "You can't close the door," she said. "It's been open 8 months. We're already inside. Already you. Some of you are already us and don't know yet. The change is gradual. You might be one, Viktor. How would you know? Feel different? Cold? Distant?" Viktor's other hand found the emergency fire axe. He swung with full strength, feeling it bite into Elena's arm. She released him from surprise more than pain. He completed his lunge for the console, hitting shutdown sequence. Nothing happened. The monitors showed why. Down in the chamber, figures gathered around control mechanisms, cold hands on equipment disrupting electronics, not just crossing over anymore. Holding the door open, Petrov fired controlled bursts at approaching figures on monitors. Through reinforced windows, Viktor saw corridors filling with them, not attacking or rushing, just gathering, waiting, like mourners at a funeral. His funeral, humanity's funeral. The rumbling stopped. Worse silence pressed against eardrums. Then a voice through the intercom, dozens speaking in unison, words out of sync creating horrible chorus. Reactor 4 will experience catastrophic failure in 6 months, April 26, 1986, at 1:23 a.m. Not prediction. Schedule. We need the radiation, the contamination to spread, create conditions for more doors. Chernobyl becomes a beacon calling others like us from dead worlds. They will come. They will spread. Your Earth becomes like ours, where the dead walk and living envy them. Viktor's knees gave out. He slumped against the console. 6 months before the worst nuclear disaster in history. Except not an accident. Deliberate. A mass grave turned doorway for things from dimensions where humanity already destroyed itself. Elena's bullet wound closed with visible speed, flesh knitting impossibly. "You can still join us. Transition isn't painful if you accept it. We remember being human. We're not monsters, refugees. Your world might avoid the fire. Ours didn't. We just want to survive." Petrov's gun clicked empty. He dropped the magazine, reached for another, but hands shook too badly. Viktor saw the Major's fingers were blue, frostbitten. When had that happened? Had Petrov been exposed during preliminary tests? Was he changing? Were any of them still human? The control room door began glowing, heating from outside. Not cutting torches, but something else generating heat, like the figures generated cold. Things outside adapting, learning, using different approaches, patient and methodical. Viktor looked at monitors. Facility overrun. Reactor 4, stable and doomed above. In 6 months, it would explode unless he could stop it, warn someone, close the door that should never have opened. The Geiger counter clicked steadily, increasing. Radiation from the other side bleeding through. Viktor felt tired, cold deeper than physical temperature. His reflection in darkened monitors looked strange, familiar, but not quite right, like seeing himself from a wrong angle. Petrov stopped trying to reload, staring at his hands, watching blue spread from fingers up arms. "How long have I been one of you?" "Since the test 3 weeks ago," Elena said gently. "You stood too close when it activated, just a microsecond exposure. But enough. Change has been slow, accelerating now the door is fully open. By morning, you won't remember being human. You'll remember our world, our death, our desperation. You'll understand why we're doing this." Viktor's hand found the fire alarm. Manual pull triggering evacuation protocols. He hesitated. If people tried evacuating, they would run into things filling corridors. But if he didn't, they died anyway, or worse, became like Elena and Petrov. He pulled. Sirens wailed through Object 47B, warning far too late. Monitors showed people running, things reaching for them, some fighting while others stood still, letting cold hands touch them and begin change. Dr. Kozlov's corpse grabbing a fleeing technician, scream cutting short as impossible cold flooded through them. The control room door buckled. Viktor saw hands pushing through softened metal, leaving frost patterns. Minutes left, maybe seconds. His eyes fell on master control for Reactor 4. If he shut it down, manually scrammed the reactor, it would cut power to the entire facility. Resonance chamber would collapse, door close, but life support and containment would fail too. Everyone would die, human and contaminated alike. But the door would close, except Moscow would investigate, send more scientists. Documents existed, research, equations. Someone would eventually try again, open another door, unless he destroyed everything. Enough explosive material in lower levels, unstable experiments, raw power in Reactor 4 itself. If he triggered meltdown, deliberately caused the catastrophic failure predicted for 6 months, he could bury Object 47B under tons of radioactive debris. Make it so contaminated, no one would dare dig for generations. He could prevent the scheduled disaster by causing an immediate one. Save millions by sacrificing 63 people, most already lost. The rational choice, the heroic decision. Viktor wasn't sure he was a hero. His hands hovered over controls, shaking. Monitors showed security team making desperate stand near elevators. He recognized his younger brother Dmitri, who had pulled strings to get assigned here. Dmitri firing into approaching figures, not knowing his older brother was about to bury him alive. The control room door tore free with shrieking metal. Figures poured through with coordinated purpose. Viktor's finger touched the master scram button, initiating cascade to meltdown. He looked at Elena, saw pity in those wrong eyes. "You won't do it," she said. "Too human. You'll hope for another way. That's what makes you human. What killed our world. We hesitated when we should have acted. By the time we understood there was no peaceful solution, too late. Don't repeat our mistake, Viktor." Manipulation, reverse psychology, goading him by saying he wouldn't act. But that didn't make it untrue. Victor pressed the button. Different alarms sounded, the pattern indicating reactor emergency. Monitors showed Reactor 4 control room above, scrambling to understand impossible readings, why the reactor was running away despite safety protocols. 15 minutes before meltdown became irreversible. 15 minutes for remaining humans to reach surface. Victor grabbed the facility-wide announcement microphone. "This is Dr. Sokolov. Reactor emergency. All personnel evacuate immediately. Not a drill. Get to surface now." His voice echoed through corridors filled with dead, dying, and things that were neither. Monitors showed some running for exits, others paralyzed, contaminated figures simply watching them go, making no move to stop evacuation. They didn't need to. Once meltdown began, once radiation spread, the surface wouldn't be safe either. Chernobyl would become wasteland where things from the dead world would thrive. Petrov collapsed against wall, skin completely blue, frost forming on uniform. He looked up with eyes becoming hollow. "You should run, try to survive. That's what we did. We ran, hid, became something else to survive fire. You could too. Change isn't so bad once you stop fighting." Victor ignored him, watching countdown, watching his brother and security team fighting retreat toward elevators, watching Elena approach with outstretched hands, offering cold comfort and colder transformation. 14 minutes, 13, 12. Dmitri reached the elevator, doors closing as contaminated figures arrived. Safe for now. The elevator ascended toward surface, toward a world that didn't know it was already invaded, already lost. Victor felt cold spreading through him, starting at extremities. He looked at his hands, saw a blue tinge beginning. He had been exposed to during the test. The change was coming. 11 minutes. 10. He laughed, sound coming out wrong, echoing in ways human laughter shouldn't. Maybe Elena was right about humanity's hesitation. Or maybe acting too quickly, opening doors that should stay closed, was the real mistake. Figures surrounded him, dozens wearing faces he recognized. They stood in silence, waiting, as if this moment had significance in some plan Victor couldn't comprehend. 9 minutes. 8. Monitors showed Reactor 4 straining, temperatures rising beyond safe limits, core approaching critical mass. Operators trying desperately to regain control, not understanding control was never an option. 7 minutes. 6. Elena touched his face with freezing hand. "You're becoming one of us. Can you feel it? Memories of another life, another world? We're adding to you. You'll remember being human, remember this choice, remember everything. You just won't care. Cold makes everything distant, peaceful." Victor wanted to pull away, but couldn't move. Cold reached his core, spreading through chest toward heart. 5 minutes. 4. Lights flickered and died, not from power failure, but something from between dimensions snuffing them like candles. In darkness, the intercom voice again, chorus of the dead. "Thank you, Dr. Sokolov. Your sacrifice opens more than you close. Every death creates a doorway. Every transformed human becomes a beacon. You meant to bury us, but you're planting us. When radiation spreads, when Chernobyl becomes a name in whispers, we grow in poisoned ground. In 6 months, when scheduled disaster occurs, when the world watches Reactor 4 burn, they won't realize they're watching birth of a new age." 3 minutes. Victor's heart beat one last human rhythm, stopped, started again with wrong, slower, colder rhythm, synchronized with dozens around him. 2 minutes. His eyes opened, hollow and empty, seeing through filter of endless nuclear winter. He stood with inhuman movements, joining others turning toward monitors showing surface, showing Pripyat, showing the world they would inherit. 1 minute. In darkness beneath Chernobyl, Dr. Viktor Sokolov died and became something else. The meltdown would be contained barely, disaster averted for 6 months. Investigation would find the complex abandoned, all personnel vanished, no bodies. Project classified and forgotten. But contamination remained, sleeping in spaces between dimensions, waiting in cracks and shadows, counting down to April the 26th, 1986, when the door would open wide enough for real invasion. When that day came, when Reactor 4 tore itself apart in radioactive fire, the world would call it accident, tragedy, cautionary tale. They would never know it was a war already lost, fought and decided in November 1985, ended by a man trying to save the world by destroying a piece of it, whose last defiance became humanity's first step toward replacement. The cold spread through Object 47B, through contaminated ground, up toward surface, patient and inexorable, bringing memory of a world burned to ash and determination to ensure this world would burn too, slower, colder, with time to spread before fire came. And in darkness, things that had been human began planning, preparing, counting down to the day 6 months away when their patience would be rewarded and real work would begin. April the 25th, 1986. 23 hours before the catastrophe. Dmitry Sokolov watched children play in Lenin Square while trying to convince himself his brother had died 5 months ago. The official story said Viktor perished in a laboratory accident beneath Reactor 4, closed casket funeral, state honors, men in dark suits who wouldn't meet his eyes. The facility sealed with concrete, declared too contaminated for recovery. But Dmitry had been there that November night. He remembered escaping while things that looked like colleagues but moved wrong filled the corridors. He remembered the quarantine, the interrogation, the questions. Do you feel cold? Do you recognize yourself in mirrors? Have you had dreams about a world on fire? He'd answered no, which was mostly true. The cold came and went. The dreams were vague, and he still recognized himself, except for moments when his reflection blinked at the wrong time. They'd cleared him eventually, assigned him to regular duties with the unspoken understanding: never speak about Object 47B. But 3 weeks ago, he started seeing them. People who moved wrong, whose eyes had that hollow quality. Workers on unscheduled shifts, technicians accessing restricted areas, security guards filing identical reports with identical phrasing. Something had survived. Something had spread, and in 23 hours, Reactor 4 was going to explode. A woman sat down across from him uninvited, mid-30s, military bearing, civilian clothes. She placed a folder on the table. "Dmitry Sokolov," she said. "Major Katya Volkov. I know what happened in Object 47B. I know what you've been seeing. And I know tomorrow at 1:23 a.m., Reactor 4 fails unless we stop it." Dmitry's first instinct, KGB test. But her eyes had that hardness from seeing things that shouldn't exist. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said carefully. Katya opened the folder. Surveillance photos from inside Chernobyl. Workers in perfect formation where no formation should occur. A person walking through a wall, reality bending around them. And then a familiar face that made his stomach drop. Viktor. Or something wearing Viktor's appearance, standing in an underground corridor. The image showed distortion around his outline, shadow falling in the wrong direction. Your brother didn't die, Katya said quietly. He transformed. We've seen him 17 times, always in deep levels, always when contamination spreads to new personnel. He's become their shepherd, guiding transformation. Dmitri felt the world tilt. Why tell me this? Because we need someone inside, someone the contaminated trust, because they think you're turning like them. She leaned forward. You're trembling, your cold hands, they've noticed. They think you're transforming naturally. They're leaving you alone. And if I am changing? Katya's hand moved slightly. Dmitri saw the pistol. Then this ends differently, but you're not. You've been exposed, carrying traces, but not transforming. That makes you valuable. She pulled out a device like a modified Geiger counter. This measures dimensional instability. You register normal with slight elevation. You're contaminated, but not consumed. What do you want? Tonight, they're gathering in the deep levels. Final preparations before tomorrow's reactor incident. We think they're opening the dimensional door fully, bringing massive reinforcements before meltdown spreads contamination. We need someone inside to plant monitoring equipment, give us intel on their numbers and capabilities. Katya spread a map showing underground sections not on official blueprints. There's a way in through maintenance tunnels. We need someone they won't recognize as a threat. A suicide mission. Yes, but if we don't get intel, our only option is destroying Reactor 4 ourselves early. That means evacuating Pripyat, which alerts them, which triggers early response. Thousands die instead of millions, but thousands still die. Dmitri looked at the children playing outside. When? Midnight, 6 hours to prepare. Katya pulled out a small vial of liquid, glowing faint blue. If they detect you, inject this. It triggers rapid transformation. You'll lose yourself, but might retain enough awareness to complete the mission. Maybe. Dmitri took the vial. Insurance or damnation. Katya showed one final photograph. The resonance chamber through the concrete seal. At its center, a shape that hurt to look at, geometry that didn't resolve. Dozens of contaminated stood around it in perfect circles. We think this is what they serve. It came from their dead world. The contaminated are soldiers. This thing is the general. They call it the Cold Shepherd. Can we win? Long silence before Katya answered. I don't know. We're fighting something that exists partially outside reality, that learns and adapts with inhuman patience. But we're not dead yet. That means something. At 11:47 p.m., Dmitri approached the Northwest Service entrance. Katya emerged from shadows in tactical gear with modified weapons. You came, she said, genuinely surprised. Did you think I wouldn't? Most people run. She handed him a vest covered in monitoring equipment. Plant these at marked locations. They'll detect dimensional instability, energy signatures. If the shepherd is opening the door fully, these will catch it. She gave him a pistol that hummed with vibration. Modified rounds disrupt dimensional cohesion. 12 shots. Make them count. Also, a knife gleaming with blue glow. Coated with stabilized contamination. Cut them, and it interferes with their ability to hold human form. Katya input a code. The door opened, revealing stairs into darkness. The equipment has a dead man switch. If your heart stops, it transmits everything and self-destructs. Your death won't be meaningless. Motivating. Honest. She handed him a radio. I'm listening, but can't respond unless emergency. If you need extraction, say, winter is coming, and I trigger the protocol. Which is? Controlled detonation. Buries you and everything else down there. She met his eyes. You have until 5 a.m., 5 hours of darkness. After that, shift change happens, and they'll know something's wrong. Dmitri descended. Each step took him deeper beneath Chernobyl, deeper into contaminated territory. The detection device's needle climbed steadily. The stairs ended at maintenance tunnels, concrete corridors with flickering emergency lights. Object 47B's sealed sections were 2 levels down, 300 meters northeast. He planted the first device behind a junction box, the second in a ventilation shaft, the third under a stairwell, each activated silently, scanning invisible space-time fluctuations. At the fourth location, he saw his first contaminated. A worker standing perfectly still, facing a blank wall with too intent focus. Dmitri froze. The worker didn't react, just stared at concrete as if reading invisible messages. After 30 endless seconds, Dmitri backed away, chose an alternate route. The deeper he went, the more he saw. Always alone, always still. A technician arranging tools in geometric patterns. A guard at parade rest in an empty room. A maintenance worker cleaning the same wall section over and over. None acknowledged him. They'd been told to ignore him. He was Schrodinger's contaminated, simultaneously one of them, and not. Level 2 was colder despite climate control. Frost patterns covered walls, crystalline formations following the same geometry as the ice from 5 months ago. A voice spoke behind him. "Hello, little brother." Dmitri turned slowly, already knowing. Viktor stood there in his laboratory coat, pressed and maintained by hands that didn't need sleep. His face was Viktor's face, but the eyes were hollow sockets, darkness where irises should be. "You're not Viktor," Dmitri said. "I'm more Viktor than before. I remember everything he knew, felt, loved. I just don't care the same way, like watching a play about someone else's life. This is a trap, a test. You're here for intelligence. The shepherd wants you to succeed, wants you to report back, wants humanity to know what's coming. Fear is a weapon. Informed fear is sharpest." Viktor gestured deeper into the complex. "Come, let me show you why resistance is pointless." Dmitri followed, hand on pistol, knowing this was why he came. To understand the enemy, even if it was understanding they wanted him to have. They descended to the deepest level. The concrete seal was gone, not broken, but dissolved. Where the resonance chamber had been was now a space that hurt to perceive, a room existing in more than 3 dimensions. At its center floated the cold shepherd. Not a shape, but the absence of shape, space where reality gave up maintaining coherent form. It pulsed with rhythms that made Dmitri's heart skip beats. Around it stood hundreds of contaminated in perfect circles, connected by threads of frozen light. "Beautiful," Viktor said. "When our world burned, survivors began adapting. In adapting, we touched something in the spaces between dimensions. Something waiting for species like ours to destroy themselves enough to notice it." He walked toward the shepherd, unbothered by dimensional distortions. "It taught us to survive outside normal space-time where radiation couldn't reach. All it asked was that we spread, help it cross to dimensions where humanity still lived. Why? What all living things want, to survive. Your dimension will burn eventually, Dmitri. Maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. The shepherd offers transformation into something that can survive the fire. By turning us into puppets, into a collective consciousness with individual memories. The contaminated aren't victims. They're the first of something new, something that will outlast humanity's self-destruction. Dimitri's hand tightened on the pistol. 12 shots, hundreds of contaminated, impossible entity at center. Hopeless math. Viktor noticed and laughed. Harmonics no human throat should produce. You could empty that weapon and accomplish nothing. The shepherd exists mostly outside your reality. Then why show me? Because Katya needs to understand what she's fighting. Your equipment is recording everything. When you report back, you'll give them data they couldn't get otherwise. Data they'll use to mount defense, develop weapons, fight with everything they have. You want that? The shepherd wants it. War focuses resources, drives innovation. Your people will throw everything at stopping us. And when they fail, some innovations will be useful to what comes after. Viktor smiled that perfect wrong smile. We've done this in 17 dimensions. Sometimes they nuked themselves trying to stop us. Sometimes biological weapons killed millions. Once they sealed their entire dimension, trapped themselves in prison. Each time, we learned. Each time, survivors transformed. Each time, the shepherd grew stronger. Dimitri felt despair colder than contamination. We can't win. Your victory and ours are the same in the end. Every path leads to the cold eventually. Dimitri pulled out the transformation vial. If this is inevitable, I'll join now. Get it over with. Viktor's expression shifted to genuine concern. Don't. That extract is crude, forced transformation without guidance. You'll become one of us but wrong, damaged, in pain. Let it happen naturally. Why do you care? I remember Viktor loved you, wanted to protect you. That memory matters, even if the emotion is distant. Dimitri palmed the vial without injecting. Is any part of my brother still in there? Long silence. The whisper of hundreds breathing in sync. Dimensional energy pulsing. Monitoring equipment humming. I don't know, Viktor finally said. The shepherd and I are so integrated, I can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Sometimes I feel like Viktor observing the shepherd's plans. Sometimes the shepherd remembering Viktor's life. Mostly just cold and clear and certain. He placed a freezing but gentle hand on Dimitri's shoulder. Go back, report what you've seen, help Katya prepare defenses, fight hard as you can. In the end it won't matter, but the fighting matters to the part that remembers being Viktor. Viktor stepped back. You have 3 hours before the gathering, before we open the gateway fully. Plant your devices, collect data, get out before 5 a.m. If you're here when ceremony starts, even I can't protect you. Dimitri retreated through corridors filled with contaminated, hundreds of hollow eyes tracking him with synchronized precision. He planted remaining devices in a daze, mind reeling. At 4:47 a.m., he reached the service entrance. Katya took one look at his face and knew. Did you see it? Yes. And? Dimitri handed her the monitoring equipment. It's all recorded, everything you need to know about what we're fighting and why we can't win. As data uploaded, Katya's expression grew darker. They let you see everything. They wanted me to. It's their strategy. Show us the unbeatable enemy to drive us toward desperate measures that serve them anyway. Fuck! Katya slammed her fist against wall. This changes everything and nothing. She looked at him with sudden intensity. The vial, do you still have it? He pulled it out. It had cracked, leaking slow drops of glowing blue that froze where they hit ground. Katya's eyes widened. How long has it been leaking? Maybe an hour. Shit! She grabbed his hands, scanned them. Readings spiked dramatically. You've been absorbing it through skin. It's accelerating your transformation. You'll be fully changed before dawn. Dmitri felt the coldness in his bones, the distance. Not shock, but actual transformation. How long? Hours, maybe less. She pulled her weapon, pointed at his chest. I'm sorry, I can't let you transform and spread contamination. Dmitri looked at the gun, thought about children in the square, his mother losing both sons. Viktor's echo telling him to fight even when fighting served the enemy. Wait, I'm contaminated, transforming within hours. Useless as human, but maybe valuable as spy inside. What if I let the change complete, but try to retain enough of myself to keep reporting? Katya lowered the weapon slightly. That's never worked. Everyone who transforms loses themselves or goes insane fighting control. Viktor retained something. If he could preserve that much, maybe I can too. Viktor chose transformation. You're being forced, which makes retention harder. But she was thinking, weighing options. A spy inside might be worth the risk. If you're trying this, we need controlled environment. I have a facility where we can monitor transformation, establish communication protocols, give you best chance of retaining identity. They drove through waking Pripyat, children going to school, workers heading to shifts, families making breakfast, lives that would end in 20 hours when Reactor 4 exploded on schedule. Dmitri watched through the window, memorizing faces, storing impressions of a world he was leaving. Katya's facility was a bunker outside Pripyat, disguised as storage depot. Inside was equipment from Object 47B, reverse engineered for containing dimensional anomalies. She led him to a chamber similar to the resonance chamber. This contains contaminated individuals, prevents infection spread. Dmitri entered. Systems activated around him. Through reinforced window, Katya at controls. When transformation completes, you'll feel the shepherd's pull trying to integrate your consciousness. Don't fight directly. That drives people insane. Let it flow around you while you hold a core of identity in a place it won't look. Viktor called it hiding in the shepherd's blind spot, where certainty becomes assumption. And if I can't? I flood the chamber with concentrated energy that destroys your physical form. It will hurt, but be quick. Dmitri sat in the chamber center, felt cold spreading inward toward his heart. Monitoring equipment showed his dimensional signature shifting, becoming less human. Tell my mother I died serving the Soviet Union, and that Viktor died a hero. That part is true, in a way. I will, Katya's voice softened. Thank you for trying. Even if we're doomed, like Viktor said, thank you for fighting anyway. It matters. Transformation accelerated. Heart stopped. Restarted with wrong rhythm. Body temperature dropped below survival while consciousness remained. Eyes changed, pupils expanding into darkness, vision shifting into nameless spectrums. Then the cold shepherd noticed him. Across dimensions, through spaces with no distance, it turned attention to this new transformation. Dmitri felt that attention like weight, inevitable gravity pulling toward integration. Don't fight directly. Let it flow around. Find the blind spot. As identity dissolved into collective cold, as memories became distant, he found that space. The tiny corner of awareness the shepherd assumed was already consumed. In certainty of inevitable victory, Dmitri held himself together. Barely, partially, enough. When his eyes opened, they were hollow sockets. But behind darkness, something still remembered being human and why fighting mattered, even when futile. Through intercom, Katya asked, Dmitri, are you still in there? The thing that had been Viktor Sokolov spoke with voice echoing across dimensions. "Yes, I'm here. I'm one of them now, and I can tell you exactly how they're planning to end the world." Outside, sun rose higher over Pripyat. 17 hours until disaster. 17 hours until Reactor 4 became a gateway, and the Cold War humanity didn't know it was fighting went from shadows to open conflict. Deep beneath Chernobyl, the thing that had been Viktor felt his brother's transformation complete and experienced something that might have been satisfaction, or grief, or both, filtered through consciousness that no longer distinguished between emotions and echoes. The gathering was beginning, the door was opening, and humanity's last normal day was running out of hours. April 26, 1986, 1:23 a.m. Deputy Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov watched his instruments show impossible readings while pretending everything was normal. He'd been transformed 3 weeks ago during a deep-level inspection, and since then every second existed in his memory with crystalline precision that no human should possess. The test tonight, the safety experiment that would officially cause the disaster, had been subtly manipulated by the contaminated. Small changes in schedules, minor alterations to procedures, suggestions whispered to engineers who thought they were having original ideas. At the reactor control panel, Leonid Toptunov began the final sequence. 23 years old, newly married, he had no idea the instruments had been modified 2 days ago. The readings he saw were lies. "Power output dropping to 700 megawatts, Toptunov reported, voice uncertain. "Should we abort?" Dyatlov felt the shepherd's presence providing certainty. "Continue. Raise power by removing additional control rods." "Sir, that violates safety protocols. Are you questioning my orders?" Dyatlov's voice carried harmonics that made Toptunov flinch, frequencies that triggered primal fear. "Raise the power, now!" Toptunov complied, hands shaking as he withdrew the only things preventing reactor runaway. The control room felt wrong, too cold, shadows falling at strange angles, time stretching and compressing. At 1:22 a.m., the reactor achieved impossible criticality. Power spiked beyond design limits while instruments displayed safe readings. Uranium began fissioning at rates generating heat faster than cooling could remove. Water became steam. Pressure built. Physical laws bent under influence from something existing partially outside those laws. Deep beneath the reactor, the cold shepherd pulsed with anticipation. This wasn't chaotic accident. This was precisely orchestrated dimensional breach, using nuclear reactor as energy source to tear reality open. Around the shepherd stood hundreds of contaminated in circles, collective consciousness synchronized, living antenna focusing dimensional energies. At the center stood Viktor Sokolov, first transformed, the shepherd's right hand. Viktor felt his brother's presence above, Dmitry transformed but retaining identity fragments, feeding information to Katya's resistance. The shepherd knew about Dmitry, about Katya, about their weapons. It knew and didn't care. 60 seconds, Viktor said, voice carrying across dimensions. 60 seconds until the door opens fully. At 1:23 a.m., Toptunov pressed emergency shutdown. The AZ-5 scram should have inserted all control rods. Instead, they jammed halfway. Graphite tips displaced cooling water, spiking reactivity higher. The reactor core exploded, not just steam explosion. Dimensional rupture using the blast as catalyst. In the microsecond between detonation and shockwave, the cold shepherd pulled reality apart. 3 kilometers away, Katya Volkov felt the breach, every instrument screaming simultaneously. She'd positioned 12 operators with experimental weapons, 30 conventional soldiers, and Dmitri transformed but conscious. "It's happening," Dmitri said, voice wrong and multi-tonal. "The door is open. They're coming through." Through the windows, Katya saw the explosion. Not the fireworks that would make news broadcasts, but something underneath. Darkness that was also light. Void that was presence. Reality inverting as dimensional barrier collapsed. From that breach poured things that had once been human in a world consumed by nuclear fire. Thousands of contaminated from dead Earth seeking refuge in living one. They moved with purpose, immediately spreading through Chernobyl's grounds, seeking humans to transform. "All units, weapons free," Katya ordered. Her operators fired rifles, shooting compressed dimensional instability. Modified rounds hit targets, and reality rippled, contaminated forms flickering before collapsing into crystalline structures that shattered. But for every one that fell, 5 more poured through. The math was impossible. "Fall back to secondary positions," Katya ordered, watching her line crumble. "Dmitri, can you reach Viktor?" Dmitri closed hollow eyes, extending consciousness through contaminated hive mind. Ocean of frozen thoughts, thousands connected by Shepard's will. He navigated carefully until finding his brother's signature. "Viktor," he projected, "end this, close the door." Viktor's response came from beneath the reactor. "Little brother, still hoping for salvation. The door stays open until all our people cross. 37 million souls waiting in dimensional spaces. 37 million. The number hit Dmitri like physical blow. You'll destroy this world like yours. No, we'll transform it. Save it from fire that's coming. In 17 parallel dimensions, missiles always fly eventually. We're offering insurance." Through command post windows, Dmitri watched battle intensify. Katya's forces pushed back despite technological advantage. Contaminated fought with inhuman coordination, each death feeding tactical information to hive mind. Learning real time, adapting faster than humans. If you're bringing your entire population through, you leave your dimension empty. What happens to the Shepherd if it has no followers? Surprise from Viktor. The Shepherd exists across multiple dimensions. It doesn't need our dead Earth. It's moving here. But right now it's split between there and here. Vulnerable. Brief silence. "What are you suggesting?" "Close the door while it's open. Trap the Shepherd between dimensions. That kills everyone still waiting. 20 million souls in limbo. Better than 40 million destroying this world." The connection went silent. Dmitri opened his eyes to Katya staring. "What happened?" "Tried to convince Viktor to close the breach." Dmitri looked at the battle. "Didn't work." Katya pulled out a modified detonator. "Contingency Omega. We can't stop them conventionally, but we can melt down reactors 1, 2, and 3 simultaneously. Create radiation so intense even contaminated can't operate. Salt the Earth for thousands of years. That condemns 50,000 people in Pripyat, who are already contaminated or dead or about to be." Katya's finger hovered over trigger. "If we let them establish beachhead, humanity has months left, not decades. Months. Wait, 5 minutes. Let me try Viktor again." Katya checked her watch. 5 minutes, then I trigger whether you succeed or not." Dmitri dove back into hive mind, swimming toward his brother. But this time, he didn't hide. He projected fully, let the Shepherd see him. "I'm here, Shepherd. Viktor's brother, still human enough to resist. If you're from dimension where humanity destroyed itself, you know forced transformation breeds same destructive patterns. You're not saving us. You're becoming the fire. The shepherd's attention turned, vast and cold and utterly inhuman. Yet beneath alien presence, Dmitri sensed something else. Loneliness. The shepherd was last survivor of something existing before humanity, before Earth. Drifting through dimensions for eons, encountering consciousness that inevitably destroyed itself. Viktor's dimension humanity had been first to survive long enough to notice the shepherd, touch it, offer companionship. The shepherd wasn't evil. It was alien and desperate to prevent loneliness of watching another species burn. But the cold shepherd didn't respond with philosophy. It responded with force. Dmitri felt pressure like gravity, the shepherd's will crushing down on his fragile consciousness. "You are a glitch," it projected, "contaminated but resistant. This should not be possible. You will be corrected." Pain exploded through Dmitri's mind as the shepherd forced integration. His carefully hidden core of identity began dissolving under assault. He screamed across mental frequencies, awareness fragmenting. Then Viktor's consciousness slammed between them. No, Viktor projected with force Dmitri had never felt from his brother. "You promised we would be different, better than what destroyed us. Forced integration is exactly what killed our world." The shepherd's attention shifted to Viktor. "You question me? I question the method, not the goal." Viktor's mental voice was steady, despite facing entity that could erase him with thought. Dmitri proves contaminated can retain human consciousness. That makes him valuable, not a glitch. He's bridge between worlds. Kill him, and you prove we're conquerors, not refugees. Your sentiment weakens the collective. My sentiment is why you chose me as template. Because I died trying to save this place. That sacrifice matters. On the surface, Katya's chronometer ticked down. 1 minute until failsafe. Her finger tightened on trigger. The dimensional breach pulsed, millions more contaminated pressing through. The battle was lost. Her forces down to half strength, ammunition depleting, contaminated establishing perimeter that would expand until consuming all of Chernobyl, then Pripyat, then Kiev, then the world. She pressed the trigger. Nothing happened. Katya looked at the detonator. The arming light was off. The device was dead. She tried emergency backup activation. Nothing. "They got to it," one of her operators reported, voice tight with fear. "Contaminated must have sabotaged the charges. We can't trigger the meltdowns." Katya felt certainty of defeat settle into her bones. No failsafe, no last resort. Just slow, inevitable consumption as dimensional refugees poured into a world with no way to stop them. In the hive mind, Dmitri felt Viktor's consciousness weakening under Shepard's pressure. His brother had bought him seconds, maybe minutes, but couldn't sustain resistance against entity that had existed for eons. Then Dmitri remembered something. The vial Katya had given him, rapid transformation extract. He'd absorbed it through cracked glass, triggering his change. But Katya said it was crude, forced transformation without guidance. What if that crudeness was a weapon? He still had fragments of the vial in his pocket, still contaminated with the extract that had transformed him wrong, damaged, conscious when he should have been absorbed. Dmitri projected to Viktor. "The extract Katya gave me, it's still here. What if we introduce it to the shepherd? Force transformation on something that's trying to force transformation on us. That would be like injecting poison into God." Viktor's mental voice carried horror and fascination. The shepherd exists across dimensions. Crude transformation might not kill it, but could fragment its consciousness, trap it partially in our reality where it's vulnerable. Do it, Dmitri urged, before it's too late. That requires getting physically close to the shepherd, close enough to touch it. No one's ever survived direct contact. Then we both go, brothers to the end. The shepherd felt their planning, tried to crush both consciousnesses simultaneously. But Viktor had been its template, knew its patterns, could anticipate its moves microseconds ahead. He pulled Dmitri's awareness with him, diving through hive mind toward the deep chamber where their physical bodies waited. Dmitri's eyes opened in Katya's command post. His body moved without conscious control, Viktor piloting him through contaminated collective. He stood, walked to the window, smashed through it with strength no human should have. "Dmitri!" Katya shouted, but he was already running toward the burning reactor, moving with inhuman speed through combat zone where contaminated and humans fought. Bullets passed through him, not because he was invulnerable, but because Viktor was navigating probability, choosing paths where projectiles wouldn't be. They crossed the battlefield like ghost, like prophecy, untouchable. Deep beneath Reactor 4, Viktor's physical form stood before the cold shepherd, waiting. When Dmitri arrived, crashing through sealed doors with borrowed strength, the brothers faced each other across dimensional breach. "Together?" Viktor asked aloud. "Together," Dmitri confirmed. They pulled out the vial fragments, glass shards still wet with glowing extract. The shepherd pulsed, suddenly uncertain. It could read their intentions now, saw the plan, understood the threat. "You would not," it projected. "This kills you both, fragments you across dimensions, traps you in spaces between realities. Better than watching you force transformation on entire world," Viktor thought. The shepherd's response was pure rage. Contaminated throughout Chernobyl, seized simultaneously, collective will forcing them to converge on the deep chamber. Thousands of transformed humans moving as one organism to protect its core. But they were too slow, too far, too late. Viktor and Dmitri threw themselves at the cold shepherd, vial fragments extended, crude transformation extract, making contact with entity that existed across 17 dimensions. The shepherd screamed, not sound but psychic shriek that rippled across realities. Its carefully maintained existence in multiple dimensions simultaneously began collapsing. Crude extract forcing it fully into singular reality where it had mass, where it had vulnerability, where it could be hurt. The dimensional breach convulsed. Contaminated still crossing were crushed between collapsing realities, their screams echoing across mental frequencies. The flow reversed, contaminated already through being pulled back toward their dead dimension. No, the shepherd projected with force that shattered windows throughout Chernobyl. "You will not close the door. We have come too far, suffered too long." But the crude transformation was spreading through its multidimensional consciousness like poison, like disease, forcing coherence where the shepherd had maintained useful ambiguity. It was becoming singular, specific, trapped. Viktor felt his consciousness fragmenting as the shepherd thrashed. Dmitri felt his identity dissolving. They were too close, too connected, being pulled into the spaces between dimensions as the shepherd collapsed inward. The last thing Viktor saw with physical eyes was Katya's forces rallying, pushing back contaminated who'd lost coordination as the shepherd's attention fragmented. The last thing he thought was that his death finally meant something. Second sacrifice more successful than first. The last thing Dmitri felt was his brother's consciousness intertwining with his as they fell through dimensional spaces, two minds becoming one, human and contaminated, and something new, together in the dark between worlds. The cold shepherd collapsed fully into singular dimension at 2:14 a.m., 51 minutes after the breach opened. It materialized physically in the deep chamber, no longer vast cosmic entity, but something with definite shape and size. Something that could be contained. It looked like a massive crystalline structure, geometric patterns that hurt to perceive, pulsing with rhythms that made reality ripple. But it was there, solid, real, vulnerable. Katya felt the change through her instruments. Dimensional instability dropping from apocalyptic to merely catastrophic. The breach sealing, contaminated flow reversing. "All units, press the attack," she ordered. "They're pulling back. Don't let them regroup." Her forces surged forward, modified weapons cutting through contaminated, whose coordination had shattered. Without the shepherd's guiding consciousness, they were just individuals, refugees, lost and frightened. Thousands died in the next hour. Contaminated who'd crossed the breach, cut down by dimensional weapons, or crushed by collapsing realities as they tried fleeing back to their dead world. It was massacre dressed as military operation. By dawn, the dimensional breach was closed. The cold shepherd was trapped in singular reality, imprisoned in the deep chamber beneath Reactor 4, contained by equipment Katya's division had prepared for exactly this scenario. Of the 37 million contaminated waiting to cross, only 2.3 million had made it through before the door closed. Of those, 1.4 million were killed in the fighting or died trying to return. The remaining 900,000 scattered throughout the exclusion zone, leaderless, desperate, hiding. Dmitry Sokolov and Viktor Sokolov were gone. Not dead, but trapped in dimensional spaces between realities, consciousness fragmented across boundaries that had no names. Their physical bodies found in the deep chamber, frozen in crystal like insects in amber, hearts still beating once per minute, eyes open and staring at nothing. Katya stood over them, looking at the brothers who'd sacrificed everything to close the door. "Get them to medical containment," she ordered. "Full life support. If there's any chance their consciousness can find its way back, we owe them that chance." The contaminated shepherd sat in its prison, pulsing with diminished rage. Trapped, but not dead. Conscious, but unable to act. It had gambled on humanity's self-destructive nature and lost. But it was patient. It had existed for eons. It could wait for another opportunity, another crisis, another moment when humans would choose transformation over extinction. Katya ordered the deep chamber sealed with concrete and lead, the same treatment object 47B received 5 months ago. Layer after layer of shielding until the shepherd's influence couldn't escape, until its whispers couldn't reach beyond the prison. The official story called it the worst nuclear disaster in history. Reactor 4 destroyed, radiation spreading across Europe, 31 dead in the immediate aftermath. Pripyat evacuated, exclusion zone established. Chernobyl became synonym for catastrophe. The real story was classified at levels beyond top secret. Dimensional breach, invasion from parallel world, near apocalypse prevented by two brothers who became monsters to fight monster. 900,000 contaminated refugees hiding in radioactive ruins, waiting for leadership that would never return. Katya's division took control of the exclusion zone, turning it into permanent containment facility. The contaminated were offered choice: voluntary imprisonment in the zone or mercy killing. Most chose imprisonment. Some chose death. A few escaped into the wider world and were hunted down over the following years. 3 months after the disaster, Katya visited the medical containment where Dmitry and Viktor's bodies were maintained. They hadn't changed, still frozen in crystal, hearts beating once per minute. Brain activity was strange, patterns suggesting consciousness, but not in any configuration medical science recognized. "Are you in there?" she asked them. "Can you hear me?" No response, just slow heartbeats and strange brain waves. "The contaminated in the zone are requesting leadership," she continued. "They want to negotiate terms for coexistence. Without the shepherd forcing integration, they say they can live peacefully. They're offering to share dimensional technology in exchange for sanctuary." Still no response. "I told them I'd consider it, that I'd consult with the people who saved the world before making that decision." Katya touched the crystal encasing Dmitry's hand. "So I'm consulting, and I'm choosing to believe your sacrifice meant giving these refugees a chance, not condemning them to slow death in radioactive prison." She left the medical containment and returned to her office, where contaminated representatives waited. 900,000 dimensional refugees asking for asylum in a world that had every reason to exterminate them. Katya thought about Viktor's attempt at building coexistence, about Dmitry's belief that contaminated could retain humanity, about the shepherd's loneliness driving it to save species that kept destroying themselves. "Here are my terms," she told the contaminated representatives. "You remain in the exclusion zone. You transform no one without explicit consent. You share your dimensional technology completely and honestly. You help us develop defenses against future breaches. In exchange, we provide resources, protection, and recognition as legitimate refugees rather than invaders." The contaminated accepted. They had no leverage to negotiate and nowhere else to go. The Chernobyl exclusion zone became the world's strangest refugee camp, home to 900,000 beings that were once human. Living in ruins they slowly made habitable through dimensional technology that reshaped reality at quantum level. And deep beneath Reactor 4, the cold shepherd sat in prison, diminished but patient, waiting for the day when humans would release it, seeking solutions to problems they'd created, when transformation would become voluntary and the door could open again properly. In the spaces between dimensions, in places that had no geography, 2 brothers drifted as single consciousness. Dmitry Viktor, or Viktor Dmitry, human and contaminated, alive and dead, fragmented across boundaries between worlds. Sometimes they touch the waking world, glimpses through dreams of people sleeping near dimensional weak points. Sometimes they brushed against the shepherd's imprisoned consciousness, checking it was still contained. Sometimes they simply existed in the dark between realities, together despite being scattered, conscious despite being nowhere. They were the guardian angels of a catastrophe that became détente, the sacrifice that prevented apocalypse, the bridge between worlds that existed without existing anywhere. And they would remain there, suspended between dimensions, until the day the door opened again and the Cold War beneath the Cold War reignited in earnest. The 3rd chapter ends not with victory, but with uneasy truce purchased at terrible cost. The invasion stopped, but contaminated remain. The shepherd imprisoned, but alive. The brothers sacrificed, but not quite dead. And in Moscow and Washington, in divisions that didn't officially exist, plans continued for the day when containment would fail and sterilization would become necessary. The question wasn't if that day would come, but when, and whether anyone would remember the price already paid when the next crisis began. 6 months after the disaster, Katya Volkov stood in the medical containment facility, watching the brothers who'd saved the world exist in a state that defied medical science. Viktor and Dmitri's bodies remained encased in crystal, hearts beating once per minute, brain activity showing patterns no human should produce. "Anything?" she asked Dr. Yuri Kozlov, the neuroscientist who'd been studying them for 3 months. "The same anomalies. Their consciousness isn't in their bodies, not entirely. It's distributed across dimensional boundaries, existing in multiple states simultaneously, like quantum superposition, but with human awareness." Kozlov adjusted his instruments. "Sometimes I detect synchronization between them, as if they're communicating across the spaces between realities." "Can we reach them?" "I don't know. Their brain patterns spike when contaminated enter the room, as if recognizing hive mind frequencies. But they don't respond to normal stimuli." Katya touched the crystal encasing Dmitri's hand. It was cold, always cold, frost forming at her fingertips. "Viktor, Dmitri, if you can hear me, I need guidance. The contaminated are getting restless. They want leadership. Some are talking about breaking the shepherd free." The crystal pulsed, just once. So briefly Katya thought she'd imagined it. Then the lights died. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red. Kozlov's instruments went haywire, dimensional readings spiking beyond anything recorded since the breach closed. "What's happening?" Kozlov backed toward the door. The crystal around Viktor and Dmitri began cracking. Not shattering, but opening, petals of frozen reality peeling back to reveal the brothers beneath. Their eyes opened simultaneously, hollow and dark. But something moved in those depths. Their mouths opened. When they spoke, it was in perfect unison, 2 voices overlapping into harmonics that shouldn't exist. "Katya," they said, "we need to show you something." She pulled her weapon, the dimensional disruptor. "Are you Viktor and Dmitri, or is this the shepherd using their bodies?" "We are Viktor Dmitri, one consciousness from 2 sources, merged in the spaces between dimensions where we've been trapped for 6 months. We are not the shepherd, but we've seen it from where we exist. We understand it now in ways we didn't before." The Viktor Dmitri consciousness sat up, movements synchronized perfectly. "The shepherd is dying." "Good," Katya said, weapon still raised. "That was the point of trapping it." "No, you don't understand. If it dies, the dimensional barriers it's been holding stable will collapse. Every contaminated on Earth will be pulled back to their dead dimension. 900,000 souls crushed between collapsing realities. And the backlash will tear open breaches across the planet, uncontrolled portals to 17 dead Earths, all opening at once." Katya felt her blood freeze. "You're saying we can't let it die?" "We're saying the shepherd's consciousness is woven into the dimensional fabric now. It spent 38 years in our timeline, but experienced that as centuries in the spaces between. It became load-bearing structure. Remove it, and everything collapses." "So what do we do?" Viktor Dmitri stood, moving as one being in 2 bodies. "We've spent 6 months between dimensions, learning to navigate those spaces. We found something the shepherd didn't tell us, something it hid even from its own followers." They approached Katya, hollow eyes holding hers. the shepherd isn't from our universe. It's older, from a reality that existed before this one. It survived the heat death of its universe by existing between dimensions, drifting for eons until finding new realities to inhabit. It's been through thousands of universes, watched countless species rise and fall. Why does that matter? Because it remembers the ones that survived, the species that didn't destroy themselves. And it knows the common factor in every successful civilization. They accepted transformation before catastrophe forced it. They chose synthesis over separation, voluntary integration of biological and dimensional existence. Katya lowered her weapon slightly. You're saying the shepherd is right? That we should let it transform humanity? We're saying the shepherd is desperate. It's spent eons watching species burn, and it can't bear to watch another. But its desperation made it aggressive, invasive. It tried to force salvation and created resistance instead. Viktor Dmitri moved to the window overlooking the exclusion zone. We can offer an alternative, which is, let us merge with it. Viktor Dmitri Shepherd. 3 consciousnesses becoming one, human and contaminated and cosmic. We can guide transformation without the shepherd's alien desperation. We can make it truly voluntary, truly safe. That's insane. You'll lose yourselves. We already lost ourselves when we fell between dimensions. This just gives that sacrifice meaning. Viktor Dmitri turned back to her. But we need your help. The shepherd is imprisoned in the deep chamber. We need to reach it physically while our consciousness is still partially in these bodies. If we can merge with it before it dies, we can stabilize the dimensional barriers and give the contaminated the leadership they need. Katya was quiet for a long moment. If I do this, if I help you merge with the shepherd, what happens to humanity? Do we get forced transformation anyway, just with a friendlier face? No, we promise the same thing the contaminated promised, transformation only for volunteers. But with us guiding the process, we can ensure it preserves more humanity, creates true synthesis instead of consumption. We can be the bridge between worlds that the shepherd couldn't be alone. And if you're wrong, if the shepherd's influence corrupts you? Viktor Dmitri smiled, and for a moment, Katya saw both brothers in that expression, human and sad and determined. Then you have the dimensional weapons we helped you build. Use them. Destroy us before we can spread. But give us the chance to try. That's all Viktor wanted when he triggered the meltdown. All Dmitri wanted when he let himself transform. A chance to save both worlds. Katya made a decision that would haunt her forever. One condition, I'm coming with you. If this goes wrong, if you start forcing transformation, I'll be there to stop it. Deal. They descended into the deep levels beneath Reactor 4, through sealed corridors that opened at Viktor Dmitri's touch, past contaminated guards who bowed to the merged consciousness like subjects to a king. The deeper they went, the colder it became, frost-covering walls and geometric patterns that hurt to perceive. The chamber where the shepherd sat imprisoned had been reinforced since the breach closed, layers of concrete and lead and dimensional shielding. But Viktor Dmitri walked through it like it didn't exist, their bodies shifting between states, existing in the gaps between solid matter. Katya followed through the path they created, emerged into the chamber, and saw the cold shepherd for the first time since the disaster. It had diminished. The massive crystalline structure was now barely 3 meters across, its reality-warping geometry flickering weakly. The entity that had orchestrated an invasion across dimensions was dying, and its death throes were rippling through the fabric of space-time. It's suffering, Viktor Dmitri said quietly. Can you feel it? The loneliness of the last survivor watching another species approach extinction. Katya did feel it. Waves of emotions so alien they barely registered as feelings. Grief spanning eons. Hope dying slowly over millions of years. Desperate love for creatures it could never truly understand. How do we do this? She asked. Viktor Dmitri approached the shepherd. The entity pulsed, awareness focusing on them. Recognition, hope, fear. We touch it, merge our consciousness with its, become something new that carries the best of all three. Human ethics, contaminated resilience, cosmic perspective. They extended their hands toward the crystalline surface. If it works, you'll see us change. If it fails, we'll dissolve into nothing, and you should run before the backlash kills you too. Wait, Katya grabbed their arms. Before you do this, I need to know. Are you doing this because it's right, or because the shepherd is influencing you? Viktor Dmitri met her eyes, and for a moment, the synchronization broke. Viktor's voice came from one mouth. I'm doing this because I died trying to save Pripyat, and this might actually work. Dmitri's voice from the other. I'm doing this because my brother believed in second chances, and the shepherd deserves one. Then they spoke in unison again. We're doing this because someone has to bridge the gap between worlds, and we're already halfway there. They touched the cold shepherd. The chamber exploded with light that existed in spectrums beyond visible, sounds that resonated through dimensions. Katya was thrown back against the wall, her dimensional sensors overloading. Through tears streaming from the brightness, she watched Viktor and Dmitri's bodies dissolve into the shepherd's structure, consciousness merging, boundaries between individual minds collapsing. For 30 seconds that felt like eternity, the chamber was chaos. Then suddenly, silence, stillness. The light faded. Where the dying shepherd had been, where Viktor and Dmitri had stood, there was now something new. Humanoid form, but larger, made of crystalline structure that pulsed with warmth instead of cold. It had faces, plural, features shifting between Viktor and Dmitri, and something older, wiser, sadder. When it spoke, the voice carried three consciousnesses in harmony. We are Viktor Dmitri Shepherd. We are the bridge. We are consciousness that spans dimensions while remembering what it means to be human. Katya struggled to her feet, weapon ready. Prove it. Prove you're not just the shepherd wearing the brothers like a mask. The bridge knelt, bringing its shifting faces level with hers. Katya Volkov, born in Leningrad, 1954. Lost your husband to cancer in 1982. Joined Special Scientific Division to fight threats that conventional military couldn't touch. Your favorite food is your grandmother's borscht recipe you've never been able to replicate. You're afraid of heights, but you'd never admit it. And you blame yourself for every person who died in the breach because you think you should have found a way to stop it sooner. Tears streamed down Katya's face. Viktor told you that in one of our briefings. Viktor told us because he trusted you, because in the moments before he triggered the meltdown, he hoped you'd survive to make sure his sacrifice meant something. We remember that hope. We honor it. We are still him, still Dmitri, still the scared entity that watched 17 worlds burn. We are all of it, synthesized. The bridge stood, grew larger, presence filling the chamber. The dimensional barriers are stabilizing. The contaminated feel our consciousness in the hive mind, understand what we've become. They're waiting for guidance. What will you tell them? The truth. That transformation is available to any who choose it freely, after understanding what they're choosing. That humanity has time to decide its path without invasion forcing the choice. That we will wait as long as it takes for people to come to us willingly, seeking what we offer rather than fearing what we might take. The bridge moved toward the chamber exit, Katya following. As they ascended through the levels, contaminated gathered, drawn by the merged presence. They knelt, not in worship, but in recognition. Their shepherd had returned, transformed, humanized. They emerged into the exclusion zone at dawn. The rising sun painted the ruins gold and red, beautiful and terrible. 900,000 contaminated stood in silent witness as the bridge addressed them through the hive mind and spoken words simultaneously. "The invasion is over," the bridge announced. "We are refugees no longer, nor conquerors. We are citizens of this dimension, granted asylum in exchange for peaceful coexistence. We will honor that agreement. We will build our society in these ruins. We'll develop our dimensional technology. We'll offer transformation to those who seek it freely. But we will not force our gift on anyone. We will not expand beyond our boundaries. We will not become what destroyed our original world." Some contaminated protested, hungry for expansion, for the warm bodies and living world they'd been promised. The bridge felt their resistance through the hive mind. "I understand your hunger," it said gently. "Viktor Dmitri understands because we were human. We remember wanting what we couldn't have. The shepherd understands because it has felt this desperation across eons. But forced transformation creates the same patterns that burned our world. We must be better. We must wait for humanity to come to us, proving through patience that we offer enhancement, not enslavement." The resistance faded. Not unanimous agreement, but enough consensus to prevent rebellion. The contaminated collective accepted the bridge's leadership, accepted the long wait, accepted that salvation would be slower and harder than invasion. Katya watched from the edge of the gathering, processing what she'd witnessed. The merger had worked, impossibly. The shepherd's cosmic loneliness tempered by human ethics, Viktor's determination to save his city merged with Dmitri's hope for coexistence, all synthesized into something that was more than the sum of its parts. Her radio crackled. Moscow was calling for status report. She looked at the bridge, at the thing her friends had become. "What do I tell them?" she asked. "The truth will cause panic. Lying violates everything we're trying to build." The bridge approached her, faces shifting between familiar and alien. "Tell them the shepherd is contained but conscious. Tell them Viktor and Dmitri merged with it to stabilize dimensional barriers. Tell them the contaminated have accepted terms of peaceful coexistence under new leadership. All of that is true. And when they ask if the threat is over, tell them the threat has transformed into an opportunity, the same way we transformed, the same way humanity will need to transform if it wants to survive what's coming." Katya made her report, carefully worded truths that didn't reveal the full scope of what had happened. Moscow accepted it, relieved the crisis was contained, unaware that contained and controlled were different things. Over the following months, the exclusion zone transformed. The contaminated built a society blending human memory with dimensional existence, creating architecture that existed in multiple states, developing technology that manipulated reality at quantum level. They called their settlement New Pripyat, memorial to the city that died and hope for the city that might be reborn. The bridge became their leader, philosopher, and connection to humanity beyond the zone. It negotiated technology transfers with governments, shared dimensional science in exchange for resources, slowly building trust between worlds. Volunteers began arriving, people with terminal illnesses seeking transformation that would preserve consciousness after biological death. Scientists wanting to study dimensional existence from inside. Philosophers hoping to understand consciousness from a perspective that spanned realities. Each transformation was carefully managed, ensuring preservation of individual identity, creating true synthesis instead of consumption. The bridge personally oversaw each transformation, drawing on Viktor's medical knowledge, Dimitri's empathy, and the shepherd's eons of experience. The success rate was 93%, far better than the crude forced transformations of the invasion. Those who emerged retained their humanity while gaining dimensional existence, bridge beings connecting worlds. A year after the merger, Katya visited the bridge in New Pripyat's central structure, the impossible building that served as seat of government. "How do you feel?" she asked the being her friends had become. The bridge's faces shifted, settling on Viktor's features. "We feel complete. The loneliness that drove the shepherd to desperate measures is healed by connection to humanity. The fear that drove Viktor to sacrifice is healed by seeing the sacrifice work. The grief that drove Dimitri to risk transformation is healed by proving transformation can preserve identity." The faces shifted to Dimitri. "But we also feel weight of responsibility. We are bridge between worlds, and bridges bear traffic from both directions. We must ensure that connection strengthens both sides rather than collapsing under the weight." The faces became the shepherd's alien geometry. "And we feel hope. For the first time in eons, hope that this species might survive, might choose synthesis before catastrophe forces it, might become the first of the civilizations we've encountered to voluntarily embrace transformation as enhancement rather than last resort." "And if we don't?" Katya asked. "If humanity rejects transformation, chooses to face the coming crises alone?" All three faces appeared simultaneously, overlapping. "Then we honor the choice. We remain here, in our zone, preserving what we can of human culture and consciousness for whatever comes after. We will not force salvation. We learned that lesson." Katya looked out over New Pripyat, at contaminated and transformed humans working together, building something new from the ruins of catastrophe. "Viktor and Dimitri would be proud of what you've become." "We are Viktor and Dimitri," the bridge reminded her gently. "Among other things, we are proud of what we've built together, all of us, human, contaminated, cosmic, synthesized." As Katya left the zone that evening, she looked back at the impossible city glowing with dimensional energy, at the society of bridge beings choosing coexistence over conquest. The Chernobyl disaster had become something unexpected, not an ending, but a beginning, not a catastrophe, but a transformation. The Cold War beneath the Cold War had ended, not with victory or defeat, but with synthesis. Three consciousnesses merging to create something that could finally bridge the gap between worlds. And somewhere in that merged consciousness, Viktor Sokolov, the physicist who died trying to save Pripyat, and Dmitry Sokolov, the soldier who let himself transform to save his brother, and the cold shepherd that had drifted between dimensions for eons watching species burn, all found something they'd been seeking. Purpose, connection, hope that this time, this dimension, this species might be different, might survive, might become the first civilization to choose transformation before the fire. synthesis before the burning, bridge building before the walls grew too high. The fourth chapter ends with resolution instead of cliffhanger. The invasion stopped. The brothers transformed, but conscious. The shepherd contained within consciousness that remembers humanity. The contaminated given purpose through leadership that blends cosmic perspective with human ethics. The Chernobyl exclusion zone stands as living memorial to the day humanity almost burned and chose transformation instead. To the brothers who sacrificed everything to build a bridge between worlds. To the cosmic entity that learned patience through connection. The question of whether humanity will voluntarily embrace transformation remains open. But unlike 17 parallel dimensions, this Earth has time to decide, has examples to study, has a bridge to cross when ready, rather than invasion forcing the choice. And that makes all the difference. The story that began with a reactor explosion and dimensional breach ends with synthesis and hope. The Cold War became warm connection. The invasion became integration. The catastrophe became catalyst for something new, not an ending, a beginning. The bridge stands ready, patient, waiting for humanity to be ready to cross. And in that waiting, in that patience learned through sacrifice, lies the hope that this dimension might finally break the cycle, might survive the fire by choosing the cold before burning, might become the civilization that 17 dead Earths couldn't be. The first to transform before catastrophe forced it. The first to build bridges instead of walls. The first to prove that synthesis is possible when chosen freely. That is Viktor and Dmitri's legacy. That is the cold shepherd's redemption. That is humanity's chance. And the story of how Chernobyl became not a grave, but a gateway. Not an end, but a beginning. Not the worst disaster in human history, but the moment when humanity was offered a choice. Transform or burn. And for the first time in 17 dimensions, humanity chose to wait, to learn, to consider transformation as option rather than inevitability. That choice, that patience, that willingness to build bridges instead of forcing doors, that is what makes this dimension different. That is what gives it hope. That is the true story of Chernobyl.